I mentioned that this is a subject that's not really for the squeamish, and it's a subject that is pretty much almost guaranteed to get you sort of attacked, because you are, in a sense, attacking one of the canons of our civilization, one of the pillars upon which we've built our modern zeitgeist. And one of those is our view of one of the most formative periods in modern Western history, the Second World War and the aftermath. And I'm sort of challenging the view that it was just evil people who caused the Holocaust. It wasn't. It was evil people victimizing good people. That's kind of the way that it has come down to us. And I'm kind of challenging that. Or I'm rather challenging the idea that there are good versus evil people, simply by pointing out that that kind of dynamic could end up leading to another Holocaust. But you still have to be very careful when you get into this, when you get into this kind of a discussion, to be very circumspect and to think several moves ahead in terms of where you think this philosophy may take you. For example, I mentioned otherizing. In order to hate somebody, I think that a certain degree of otherization is necessary, even, as I say, when you hate yourself. It's a subject-object relationship. You, as one thing, hates something else. It implies a sort of a subject-object relationship between you and your own personality, which, Freud and that sort of thing kind of agree with. And it sort of implies a subject-object relationship to other people, others. Now, you look into that and you sort of say, where did this come from, this idea that there are other people fundamentally different, fundamentally other to us? Well, best way to look at it is to sort of see an example external to myself, so I can look at it clinically and sort of scientifically. Now, I look around for ideas on otherness. Where do I see that? Well, first of all, you see that in Nazi propaganda. Where else do you see it? You see it in the Old Testament, don't you? And that raises some very uncomfortable questions in terms of what we're going to conclude when you sort of seek an explanation for the entire idea of otherizing others. You end up saying, who started this otherizing business? Oh, it's them. They did it. You see, it's this weird sort of dynamic. It's like Nietzsche's ideas on the herd and the Übermensch and everything like that, where he was sort of arguing against all ideas of tribe and nation, or not necessarily arguing against them, but trying to get people to rise above it, or suggesting ways by which we could rise above it. And that philosophy being altered slightly to make him look like he was the precursor to the Third Reich. When you sort of say, well, the Roma have this term called gajo, the Jews have this term called Gentile, where they're kind of otherizing the entirety of human race, the human race. In a sense, we could say, well, they started it. You see how that you have to be careful to avoid falling into that trap, because who's otherizing us? Well, those other people are otherizing me. I don't know. Is this idea of the other somehow inherent in what we are? I don't know. It may be. You have to go back pretty darn far. And what the ancient Hebrews did when they cooked up the idea of the Gentile may simply have been what everybody did, who belonged to any kind of a tribe or nation. There's us and then there's everybody else. The ancient Athenians referred to the Spartans almost in the same way as the ancient Hebrews referred to the ancient Canaanites, even though that the Spartans and the Athenians were the same people. Arguably, the Canaanites and the Israelis were the same people, really. And you look at cases of actual otherization where to an outsider, the people are almost identical. there's this ridiculous dispute taking place now, or to outsiders, between the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia and Greece, where they're both fighting over what Alexander the Great was. This is a quarrel that's going on to this day. And, it could conceivably be the contributing factor in a war. It's just that there's us, and then there's those bastards in the next valley over there. Those people. This goes back 2,500 years to somebody who was long dead and doesn't much care what we get up to anymore. But it's just we have a claim on Alexander. They don't. So you have to, I think, be careful when you're getting into these things. You have to be careful when you even begin to discuss otherizing. Because when you try and trace it back to its source, a lot of subconscious otherization takes place. I see this right now in the sort of debate that I am sort of more or less low-level engaging with quote-unquote antinatalists, or people who self-identify as such. There's an enormous tendency for each side in that debate to otherize the other. An enormous temptation that I myself am not immune to. I try to stay immune to it, but it's not easy. That's one of the reasons why I've kept my distance from the more vocal of them, because I don't want to get into a situation in which I'm doing nothing but, we're just doing nothing but punching each other and otherizing each other. But I think that this tendency to otherize is something that has to be examined. And it has to be examined exhaustively and more or less constantly in real time, and more or less make it as almost a way of thinking to analyze, is otherization taking place in here? Am I otherizing somebody else? I don't think that it's something that you can say, this was a bad idea, that it's time to jettison. I think that otherizing might actually take place all the time, in real time, in all of our minds. When we try and systematize things, that's one of the sort of pratfalls of categorizing things, of Aristotelian thinking. You categorize things to make sense out of them, but those categories are clumsy. Those categories, when you apply them to people, can lead to things like Auschwitz in one form or another. You might think that it's pretty harmless if the Roma decide that the Gajos are unspeakably evil and hostile and everything like that, because there's such a small number of them and there's such a minor annoyance to anyone, even at their absolute stereotypical worst, that you would sort of think, well, who cares if the Roma or the Mennonites otherize me? You'll be careful, John Book, with all them English. You sort of look at that and think, that's just kind of cute, like, who cares what these people think? I don't even particularly care if outside of the local synagogue after the service on Saturday, when somebody is, the guys are out there smoking cigarettes and talking to each other, if they offhandedly make a few wisecracks about the goys. I doubt that it happens, but if I knew it would happen, what do I care? They're just people outside of a church who really have no connection to me. Okay. In small doses, I think we all do this, and it's inevitable. As a matter of policy, though, as a matter of the way that we're going to run our society, a very, very dangerous idea. I think that provided we have a good, strong, stable society, we're always going to have otherizing taking place. And I think that it may be actually part and parcel of being human. But we'd better beware of where it might lead us. It's harmless enough for me to see myself, say, as, if I choose to see myself this way, as an Irishman, provided I don't think that something ought to be done about the fact that we Irish are the best people. It's just something that I guess in some strange way I like to self-identify as, but it doesn't mean anything in terms of what value I place on myself or what value I place on anyone else. That could happen, though, because I've met Irish Canadians who think that the Irish are the ones who are the best at living this thing called life. If you're an Irish Canadian or an Irish American or even an Irishman period, you may have met people like this in your life. But again, in small doses, it's harmless. But when I decide that I'm going to set off a bomb in Canary Wharf, it becomes less harmless, doesn't it? It leads to things like nationalism, which we know is, well, can be a pretty toxic thing. So really, when you otherize, when you hate, you otherize. You need to otherize in order to hate. A certain degree of otherization, I guess, is harmless enough. But again, you've got to sort of keep on top of it. The metaphor of the charioteer with his reins and all his different horses comes to mind here. I mentioned how hate may be a normal part of being a human being, but we'd better be in control or on top of our hate, or else it will lead us around. Same thing, I suppose, with otherization. If, a Roma in Bosnia right now has otherized me, I don't particularly care. If all the non-Roma in the world decide to act on the fact that they have otherized the Roma, we have a serious problem. Even if this is a normal human tendency to otherize people, we still have a serious problem. We still need to stay on top of it. We may not be able to eradicate otherization, but we have to learn to manage it, I suppose.